I remember when 9/11 happened and I started questioning everything. I was told I was crazy.
Now you know why they're out to destroy you. Today there is so much confusion about what Christianity is, because everything I thought that was Christianity, I found out wasn't. If this continues, there will be an overthrow of all things. Yea, this change and overthrow is deliberately planned. There is nothing going on today in the United States of America by accident. Nothing. There is nothing going on in the Catholic Church today that's happening by accident.
They were acting on an ancient hope that is meant to be fulfilled. If you understand esoteric writing, what you do is you try to confuse so the common people like you will not understand what's said. So you take an idea and you put it at the beginning or the end of the sentence, and then you intersperse all sorts of things in the middle to confuse common people like you. And it all goes back to these ancient times and tapping into the mystery religions. The occult is in total working control of America today, and that is why we're at war in the Middle East. What is it all about? It is part of the continuing world revolution. It is part of the move to bring about World War III and ultimately then the one world order and the new world religion.
This information is backed up by scholars, teachers, philosophers, doctors, and professionals in every respective field, all around the world. The reasons why the majority of people don't know about this is because over 80% of the population gets their world news strictly from the mainstream media. And if you trace every major media station's chain of command to the top, you will find the same people who own the corporations that lobby every high-ranking political official into place. And for those of you who are unaware of this one world government and one world religion, I challenge you to do an internet search on the New World Order. You will be overwhelmed by the amount of people trying to get the word out to the masses. This exemplifies the findings that 87% of the population formulates their belief structure according to other people's ideas. Only 13% formulate their beliefs on logic and evaluation. And sadly, the two greatest factors that lead to the ignorance of the public are as follows.
You support the mission from here? How brave you are! Real careful as you march towards that Capitol building. Be real careful for who you think is in there waiting to help you. Be real careful.
Groupthink.
We're on our way to a one-world government. Unless we, the people, say no, this will not be tolerated.
It is a term to describe a group unwilling to look beyond the overall consensus of the herd. Many times it is out of a lack of drive or ambition to ask original questions to arrive at genuine answers. But more importantly and dangerously, it is also an occurrence that spawns from the fear of looking foolish in front of peers. Both religion and politics are forms of groupthink. Words such as patriotism and faith are both fancy words that ultimately mean blind submission. Supposedly, it is considered heresy or unpatriotic to question the words of your leader. So the fear of upsetting the superior higher power has forced the herd to practice groupthink regardless of what it leads to. And one of the greatest examples of groupthink is the stigma given to conspiracy theories. The phrase conspiracy theory gives a distinct impression to the average person. The JFK assassination, Area 51, Roswell, government cover-ups, strange disappearances. These subjects probably sound a bit too fantasy for the average person, and it's quite understandable. They're supposed to sound made up. Throughout the mistranslation of time and embellishment of these stories, facts were added or omitted. Some may be true and some may be false, but one thing is for sure. If a global secret needed to remain hidden yet began emerging among the public, the best cover-up is to embellish or alter the story until it sounds ludicrous. So what happens when the secret involves the government and the government has intimate ties to the mainstream media? And the mainstream media, as said before, has been proven to sway at least 80% of the public's opinion. The logic is undeniable. Media in every form is put in place to make people feel stupid for even keeping an open mind towards conspiracy theories. Movies, books, fairy tales, and folklore are all tools to make the average person feel insane for supporting or believing in a conspiracy. And why shouldn't they? Our leaders have no problems telling us not to investigate or believe in these theories.
Let us never tolerate outrageous conspiracy theories concerning the attacks of September the 11th. Malicious lies that attempt to shift the blame away from the terrorists themselves.
The most basic of pagan practices is the control of human population to have a perfect balance between man and nature. The goal is to bring the population down to 500 million, which is over a 90% reduction in humanity. Now that we have abandoned everything we've been trained to think prior to this moment, we can start looking at the world for what it is, instead of what people tell us it is. Open your eyes today as if you've never seen the world before, and you will begin to notice that the goal of population reduction is everywhere around us.
Let me assure you that absolutely nothing that I'm going to tell you is exaggerated, is interpolated, or is imagined. Everything I'm going to tell you is documented. He who controls food controls the world. Well, they said in 1962, we're going to work toward total global implementation of Codex Alimentarius on December 31st, 2009. They were sort of guidelines. Now, Codex Alimentarius Commission is administered by the World Health Organization, WHO, and the FAO, the Food and Agriculture Organization. They fund Codex and they run it at the request of the UN. So they're mommy and daddy to Codex Alimentarius. In 1994, Codex, with no notice here in this country whatsoever, declared nutrients, put on your intellectual seatbelts, declared nutrients to be toxins. They're poisons. Under Codex, every dairy cow on the planet must be treated with Monsanto's recombinant bovine growth hormone. Furthermore, under Codex, every animal used for food on the planet must be treated with subclinical antibiotics and must be treated with exogenous growth hormones. If you do the numbers in the WHO FAO projections, the epidemiological projections, they estimate, not I, that just the vitamin and mineral guideline alone, when it goes into global implementation on December 31st, 2009, will result in a minimum of 3 billion, that's B, bad, big, billion deaths. 1 billion through simple starvation. Those folks who die are not particularly economically successful from the point of view of the corporations, but the next 2 billion, they will die from the preventable diseases of undernutrition. Who will live? Probably those people who are wealthy enough and powerful enough to have their own pushers of clean food and nutrients. So we need your help, because the United States leadership is what's going to literally save the population of the planet.
The UN has put out dozens of public documents where they're calling for an 80% world population reduction. In fact, at the Beijing Women's Conference, the World Conference, back in 1997, the head of the UN Food Program said, "We will use food as a weapon against the people."
66% of United States residents' public water is fluoridated. It is known to have tremendous effects on bone cancer, joint problems, bone weakness, lowered estrogen and testosterone levels, and dental fluorosis, which is yellowing of the teeth and pitting in the enamel. Wouldn't it make more sense to enhance public water with vitamins which are meant to be ingested to promote overall health, rather than putting such a toxic chemical in our water with a bogus explanation that it will improve our dental health? We now know that fluoride causes more dental problems than it solves. Something doesn't seem right about this. Do you honestly believe that these companies care deeply enough for the people to spend large amounts of their own money to fluoridate public water when the people already purchase their own toothpaste? But there's a difference between toothpaste and drinking water. We don't ingest toothpaste. If you go to any hardware store and look at any rat poison product, you will only find one ingredient: sodium fluoride. It is the most toxic ionic molecule outside of potassium dichromate. Now Dannon, along with other companies, have begun fluoridating bottled water. It is becoming increasingly difficult to get away from. And the fact that fluoride is also used in many prescription antidepressants shows that it eliminates aggression and motivation in people.
Fluoride, to my knowledge as a physician, has absolutely no biological benefit whatsoever.
But one of the significant things is that the Russians carried out all sorts of experiments on the people living in the Gulag. One of them, of course, was to fluoridate the water. Why? To fluoridate the water, why people are not as aggressive as they ordinarily would be. In fact, what is the active ingredient in Prozac that is so widely distributed in America today? Well, it's a fluoride compound.
And now, we are finding that public water nationwide is showing up with arsenic, lead, cadmium, and thermonium, which is a radioactive form of lead. Cancer, lowered sex drive, birth defects, sedation, and brain defects. Does this not sound like a wonder drug for anyone aiming to control a population?
It's quite astonishing, Paul, the degree to which environmentalists have not been educated about fluoride. You know, people have an unconscious trust in their doctor or their dentist, and if you can persuade doctors and dentists that fluoride is safe and good, then you're able to reach the rest of the nation. People believe their doctors and dentists, and that was a way of promoting fluoride for Bernays. Fluoride was killing their cattle, destroying their crops. Fluoride given to rats had produced bone cancer and liver cancer, and that those results had been doctored to make it look as though fluoride hadn't caused as much cancer.
The pattern that we saw, it typically is what we see with other neurotoxic agents that are well known to cause a hypoactivity or a memory problem or an IQ problem. When I first presented the results of these studies, one of the individuals sitting and listening to the results, he says, "Do you have any idea what you're saying?" And he says, "You're telling us that we're reducing the IQ of children." And basically I said, yes.
Aspartame, the artificial sweetener found in almost every low-sugar or sugar-free product on the market.
First of all, aspartame is made up of three things: methanol, which of course is what produces blindness, aspartic acid, and phenylalanine. These are all poisons. Aspartic acid, of course, produces brain lesions. This was known back in the early 1970s. Methanol produces blindness. Phenylalanine is what you see certainly in the brain, and in high dosage it produces trauma.
We're not making this all up. The FDA did publish back in, I think it was the 80s, they did publish the 92 potential side effects of aspartame. And they do, these side effects are quite, are extremely serious. Things like dizziness, problems with balance, abdominal pain and cramps, changes in vision, seizures and convulsions, etc., etc.
So the nervous system seems to be one of the areas that's most affected. So we see people have difficulty thinking. They feel like they're walking around in a cloud or a fog.
Yet despite all of these harmful effects, Donald Rumsfeld pushed it out into the stores in over 5,000 products when he was CEO of Searly, the company that manufactured aspartame.
The sustainable goal is the elimination of the middle class. The world cannot support 6 billion people. But you see, the plan behind sustainable development includes population control. It's a program for land use control, education control, and population control. The leaders of the sustainable movement say that the world's human population should not exceed 500 million people. That's a 93% reduction of today's population levels. In 1992, while the Rio conference was going on, George Bush, then president, was there. He was just offshore in Prince Charles's yacht, where he executed the Agenda 21 protocols on behalf of the United States and brought it back to Washington, D.C. Within a year, Bill Clinton, by executive order, established the President's Council for Sustainable Development.
In 1996, Bill Clinton set up the President's Council on Sustainable Development. One of the dictates of Agenda 21 is that every country in the world is to set up a national council to oversee the implementation of Agenda 21. I've listened to Gorbachev explain, we are writing a new set of 10 or 15 commandments to replace the original 10. Which one of the 10 do you think these guys don't like? Thou shalt not lie, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not covet. Because I'll tell you what, these people have lied to us. They're in the process of stealing all of this nation's natural resources, and they covet everything you have left.
To explain the map, the red are areas that are to be off limits to human beings. If you live there, you won't. The yellow areas are the areas for major control of all human activity. If you live there, you won't. The black dots are the smart growth zones. That's where human beings are to be stacked and packed in small living units along rail tracks. The Smart Growth Program ultimately has jobs assigned and children cared for by the state.
And in conjunction with Codex Alimentarius, food will be limited and water consumption will be decreased to 10 gallons per day per person. That is over a 90% reduction in people's average daily water consumption. And along with shortages of food and water, the food we will be provided with will be genetically manipulated and nutrient deficient. Genetic manipulation of food causes complications in metabolizing and utilizing food for energy.
In June of 2003, scientists reported that the gene sequence of the inserted genes into crops had actually changed their order. They had re-scrambled. So the genetic inserts are not stable. Another laboratory confirmed this and found that it changed in the same varieties in different ways that they had tested. So not only is it unstable and changing, it's not even uniform in the way it's changing. This is incredibly dangerous.
Nutrient deficiencies due to Codex's planned vitamin and mineral ban will cause billions of preventable diseases. Both of these will ultimately lead to billions of deaths.
The question is then, how do they do it? How in the world are they getting this agenda from the international level down to the local level? Well, they've got a plan for that too. Now, on the environmental side, there's probably a number of different plans, but from the environmental side, you have an organization called the IUCN, the International Union for the Conservation of Nature. Been in existence since the United Nations was created. It's not part of the United Nations Charter. It's a scientific advisor to the United Nations. But through the IUCN, such programs as ecosystem management, American Heritage Rivers, the Clean Water Initiative, the Endangered Species Act, and all the rules and regulations of the EPA, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, the U.S. Forest Service, the U.S. Park Service, and so forth. They also discuss property rights in this particular document. They say that property rights are not absolute, they're not unchanging, they're not inalienable like our Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, so they states. Rather, they are a complex, dynamic, and shifting relationship between two or more parties over space or time. In a biocentric approach, says the IUCN, the rights of nature are defended first and foremost on the grounds of the intrinsic value of animals, plants, rivers, mountains, and ecosystems, rather than simply on the basis of the utilitarian value or benefit to human beings. In other words, nature comes first. Nature's needs comes before man's needs. In a religious context, it's called pantheism, the belief that nature is God. It goes on to say, even worse, people are then members of a community of beings, like human beings, living and non-living. So a rock is now elevated up to the status of a human being, and they are both equal in the eyes of this belief system. It's not hard to imagine that if you believe that humans are the cause of all the Earth's problems, that we're overpopulated. They give two solutions, and only two, to this problem. The first is that it's estimated that an agricultural world in which most human beings are peasants should be able to support 5 to 7 billion people. Well, folks, we have 6 billion people right now. That means all of us in this room, or nearly all of us in this room, are going to have to become agrarian peasants if we use this solution. In contrast, they go on to say a reasonable estimate for an industrialized world society at the present North American material standard of living would be 1 billion people. So if we wanted to maintain our current standard of living, we would have to reduce the Earth's human population by somewhere around 70%. In 1970, just 3 years after the publication of the Iron Mountain Report, which calls for, if we're going to create a world government, we can no longer use war as a mechanism to cause fear amongst populations and therefore allow us to control the behavior of populations through fear. And they settled on, in 1967, in their publication called the Iron Mountain Report, the environmental holocaust. In 1970, 3 years after that publication, Foreign Relations began to publish a series of articles describing the ecological holocaust that was facing the world. And in this particular issue, the first issue done by George Kennan to prevent a world disaster, where it sums up in 3 points that the eco-crisis is a global threat so great that it endangers all of life on Earth.
If you look at the 10 hottest years ever measured, they've all occurred in the last 14 years, and the hottest of all was 2005. We are causing global warming. This is really not a political issue so much as a moral issue. The temperature increases are taking place all over the world, and that's causing stronger storms. Is it possible that we should prepare against other threats besides terrorists? The Arctic is experiencing faster melting. If this were to go, sea level worldwide would go up 20 feet. This is what would happen in Florida. Around Shanghai, home to 40 million people. The area around Calcutta, 60 million. Here's Manhattan. The World Trade Center Memorial would be underwater. Think of the impact of a couple 100,000 refugees, and then imagine 100 million. Those who deny global warming are just flat out wrong.
Ellen Goodman from the Boston Globe wrote, "Let's just say that global warming deniers are now on par with Holocaust deniers." Scientists silenced for questioning the threat of global warming.
I know that I've had several friends who have essentially been told that if you speak out on climate change, you must do so as an independent citizen. If you do so through our organization or through our institution, you will essentially be fired.
Once you realize how many holes there are in the consensus solution, you may begin to open up your mind to the other side of the global warming debate as a whole.
The only consensus I'm aware of is that it's warmed in the last century. They completely ignore the fact that there's this thing called the Oregon Petition that was signed by 19,000 professionals and scientists who don't agree with the idea that we are causing climate change.
I can't tell you how many calls I've received from parents saying their kids are now being shown an inconvenient truth completely unchallenged, not just in science class, but in art and math classes.
I have to speak out and say that the science we have is still incomplete, and the science we're being told by the IPCC is really incorrect science.
Global warming paradoxically causes not only more flooding, but also more drought. Big hurricanes, tornadoes, fearsome diseases, polio, tuberculosis, West Nile virus, avian flu, SARS, polar bears that have actually drowned, mosquitoes, caterpillars, communism, it's slavery, global warming. Global warming, global warming.
Aurelia Pecci, who actually created the Club of Rome and is the inner circle of the global elitists in 1991, stated that while searching for a new enemy to unite us, we came up with the idea that pollution, the threat of global warming, and the like would fit the bill. All of these dangers are caused by human intervention. The real enemy then is humanity itself.
To put this to you bluntly, global warming is a complete fallacy. Al Gore received the Grammy and the Nobel Peace Prize for a film that is filled with holes and mistruths.
Ice cores taken 2,000 meters below the surface have enabled us to look at the last 160,000 years.
We believe that in Greenland, the medieval warm period was about 1.5 degrees warmer on average than today.
And they also show consistently warmer temperatures thousands of years ago before man-made greenhouse gases existed.
Approach our time, we can see that in the period between 4,000 years ago and back to the period 2,000 years ago, which is actually the Roman age, the temperatures have been decreasing in Greenland by 2.5 degrees.
Al Gore is made out to be a revolutionary figure attempting to save the planet, which is quite true. He just doesn't mention the fact that saving the Earth doesn't involve you. According to his agenda, it will result in massive land repossession and extreme limitations on food and water and fossil fuels for the public. And please note that Al Gore is a sustainable developer. The global warming lie is very popular today because it receives major media coverage and has an attractively titled goal of saving the planet. But how does this tie in with Agenda 21? The result of the 1992 Earth Summit Conference in Rio de Janeiro was the Kyoto Treaty. The Kyoto Treaty states that every country must drastically reduce the use of fossil fuels by mandate of the United Nations.
Concentrations of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere are at their highest levels in more than 200,000 years. If the trend does not change, scientists expect the seas to rise 2 feet or more over the next century. Island chains such as the Maldives will disappear from the map unless we reverse the predictions. Thank you very much.
And as of June 2007, 172 nations and other government entities have ratified the treaty. And if you were wondering how this ties into putting the Earth's priority above human survival in accordance with pagan beliefs, every country's deadline for the implementation of Agenda 21 and the Kyoto Treaty is in 2012. And if this wasn't enough, When the Pentagon was damaged in 9/11, they set a goal to have a completely new and improved Pentagon in December of 2012. So Codex Alimentarius goes into effect at the end of 2009, which gives it 3 years for the Codex regulations on food to create billions of preventable diseases and deaths. When citizens of every nation are dying of starvation and diseases and fear for their lives because of global warming and major catastrophes, they will do what the public has been proven to do in times of great peril. They will beg for their government to step in and do something.
How are they going to get you to join the new economy? They're going to say, we have a solution. You see, one of the tricks of the Illuminati is they create a problem and then they provide the solution when you beg them to.
And pray tell, what will the United Nations suggest when there's a global problem? They will demand a global government, a new world order, exactly as the Maya, Hopi, Kali Yuga, and many other pagan civilizations prophesized. By 2012, the Kyoto Treaty, Agenda 21, Codex Alimentarius, and the new Pentagon will be fully operational to enforce a new world order. And the new world religion is obvious. We will all worship the earth, Gaia, the mother goddess we saved from extinction from global warming. We will be told that to keep from repeating the mistakes that we made in the past, we must hold the earth in higher regard than humans, just as pagan traditions require. This is too obvious to ignore. It is right in front of our faces, and yet we still refuse to see it. I guarantee you that by 2012 there will be a World War III, but it will not be between nations. It will be us and them. They know this. Why do you think the UN is consistently trying to disarm the public and the nations? They don't want us to be capable of fighting back. The proof of this is in the film released by the UN called Armed to the Teeth, where it demonizes gun ownership. It is also shown in the freedom from war policy put in place by JFK in 1961.
President John Kennedy went to the United Nations, September 1961, and he presented the United States program for general and complete disarmament in a peaceful world during a speech, and he said, this is the official program of the United States of America. It's a disarmament program. It calls for the United States to turn over its military to the United Nations. Now, let that sit for a second. It calls for the United States to turn over its military to the United Nations. The program ends by saying progressive controlled disarmament would proceed to a point where no state would have the military power to challenge the progressively strengthened UN peace force. The UN would have all military power.
This policy outlines some pretty scary scenarios when you understand what it reads. It calls for the disbanding of all national armed forces and the prohibition of their reestablishment in any form whatsoever other than those required to preserve internal order and for contributions to a United Nations peace force. This clearly shows that the UN is calling for all military power to be under their control. Inspection and verification must establish both that nations carry out scheduled limitation or reductions and that they do not retain armed forces and armaments in excess of those permitted at any stage of the disarmament process. Strategic delivery vehicles will be reduced. Arms and armed forces will be reduced. And all the while, UN peacekeeping powers would be strengthened. A UN Peace Observation Group would be available to investigate any situation which might constitute a threat to or a breach of the peace. Establishing of a permanent international peace force within the United Nations, and depending on the findings of an experts commission, a halt in the production of chemical, bacteriological, and radiological weapons, and a reduction of the existing stocks or their conversion to peaceful uses. Peaceful uses of biological, chemical, and radiological weapons? Do you see how they are perverting the word peace and making this policy sound unilaterally good? There is no other way to read this publication. It clearly states that all nations will hand over their military forces to a global United Nations military. The U.S. population is currently around 300 million. The national debt is currently around 10 trillion. So the current debt, when divvied among the American people, comes out to approximately $33,000 and has been growing at a national rate of $1.46 billion a day since 2006. Now with electronic banking, wire transfers, and credit cards, people have less physical custody of their money. As of right now, the amount of money in circulation is not able to cover the national debt. This was carefully planned since the inception of the Federal Reserve Bank. And the next planned step by the elite is already in play. George Bush signed a bill implementing the North American Union.
President Bush signed a formal agreement that will end the United States as we know it. And he took the step without approval from either the U.S. Congress or the people of the United States.
I think one thing people who are dollar-based need to focus on is the Amero. That's the one thing that nobody's talking about that I think is going to have a big impact on everybody's life in Canada, the U.S., and Mexico. The Amero is the proposed new currency for the North American community, which is being developed right now between Canada, the U.S., and Mexico to make a borderless community, much like the EU, and the dollar, Canadian dollar, U.S. dollar, and the Mexican peso replaced by the Amero.
You see, the domination of government by business is called fascism. And I'm kind of wondering how many people know what NAFTA is, the North American Free Trade Agreement. Because under Chapter 11 of the NAFTA agreement, NAFTA tribunals trump all U.S. law if it conflicts with either A, World Bank's International Center for the Settlement of Investment Disputes, or B, UN Commission for International Trade Law. Now, that sounds scary enough, but when you understand what that reads, it also gives the power to violate the First and Second Amendment, which is saying, bye-bye to the Constitution. This will weaken national sovereignty and bankrupt the dollar we use now. After this happens, the Fed will call in all debts. When the debts cannot be repaid by the people, assets will be seized. And by this, I mean absolutely everything you own, including your property, your home, your vehicle, your furniture, and the clothes on your back. This plan is already in progress. And when it takes place, you will literally be owned by the Federal Reserve Bank. This is how Agenda 21 will be implemented. The seized land will be given back to nature, and the people will be placed in smart growth megacities. So what are we to do? There is an overabundance of information out there for anyone to see pertaining to why this situation seems so hopeless and out of our control. But in all honesty, there is even more information out there about how to protect ourselves. The only problem we face is that most people don't know how to apply this information to their own lives, and rarely anybody takes the time to spell it out for us. There are many great teachers out there. Teachers who have dedicated their lives to protecting the people who need protecting the most. The teacher has the most difficult role in our society because nobody likes attaining true knowledge. True knowledge encompasses all aspects of existence, good and bad.
I found this documentary on YouTube years ago. Now, mind you, remember, YouTube used to actually be a place to find this stuff and do a lot of research. It was somewhere where you could actually share your thoughts at one point. Fancy that. Look what it's become now. Definitely not what it used to be. And a lot of this stuff has been scrubbed and removed and taken off. There's a lot of good content out there that's been removed. So although this documentary was made quite a while ago, I remember watching it, and at the time I didn't pay much attention to politics back then. I really didn't care. I wasn't too into it. But I had grown up in church, knew biblical study and all the prophecies and all of that. But I find it mind-boggling as I reflect on the events of the past few years and how it's become very evident over my journey over time. Significant changes have been unfolding throughout history. Personally, I believe that the prophecies of the book of Revelation are currently being fulfilled before our very eyes. The gradual and undeniable shift in society is becoming increasingly apparent. You see it everywhere. I mean, it's undeniable. There's no question about it. It's like as if we were being guided towards a whole new system, akin to cattle being herded by their masters. Throughout ancient times, the existence of cults, pagan rituals, mystical secret societies have been a topic of discussion, and it raises questions about their connection to biblical prophecy, technology, transhumanism, and modern-day politics. And religion. I find exploring these ideas fascinating, and the deeper I delve into this research, the more God reveals that it's all connected, all of it.